halfway through the season, and the Bucks are 20-13, which is their best start since 1920. For a team that's been so good when it comes to winning games, the conversation around the Bucks this season, both nationally and amongst Bucks fans, has seemed to skew a little bit negative overall, whether it be the coach, the defense, Brook Lopez, or any other topic. Are the common concerns about this team overblown, or is there like validity to like the angst that's in like some corners of the fan base?
I think it's really difficult to try to figure this team out after watching the team for the last 5 years. For 5
Yeah.
years under Mike Budenholzer, you knew what game you were watching every night. By the end of that 5 years, I'd seen every episode. That we were on reruns by the end of year 5. Like
Yeah.
every single night, they were going to be great defensively. They weren't going to foul. They were going to have incredible rim protection. They were going to control the glass. And sometimes could teams hit a bunch of threes? Yes, they could. That could happen. Those outlier shooting games could happen. But that was going to be the way that you were going to beat the Bucks. Was you're going to have to hit some threes tonight. That's it. Because if you don't get those threes, you're just not going to score at the rim because Giannis and Brook are there, and it's not going to work. That's not the case this year. Brook is still amazing, leading the league in blocks. He's really put together a really strong rim protection season, but their perimeter defense is just not good. You look at kind of the way that, and again, this is a decision that you make. The trade-off that you make when you trade Drew Holiday for Damian Lillard is you're probably going to be a little bit better on one side and a little bit worse on the other. Like that's just how this works. And they're not as good as on the defensive side. And it's not just that it's Dame. I think you've also had a downgrade from Grayson Allen to Malik Beasley. So now you have two poor on-ball defenders, both 6'2" at the guard position, and teams just kind of get where they want. And then on top of it, you have Adrian Griffin trying to apply more pressure on the perimeter, and that has led to even larger gaps between, back in the day, it was Drew Holiday top blocking, Grayson Allen top blocking, and you really shrink it into a confined space where this guard is going to have to try to force it up over Brook Lopez, and it's going to be a really tough shot. Now, they have 15 feet of space, 20 feet of space from where they pass the initial screen to Brook Lopez waiting at the rim, and it's put Brook in some really tough positions, and it's made Brook maybe look not as effective, but I just don't think he's been put in a position to succeed, and that's both from a personnel standpoint and a tactical standpoint. And you combine those two things, and then all of a sudden the defense is out of whack. Seth Partnow and I got together at The Athletic last week and wrote a story about their defense and why it's failing, and we talked about that aspect of it, but also this year, they've decided to switch Giannis a lot more. Giannis is switching 1 through 4 way more than he ever did under Mike Budenholzer. And with Giannis, you think of him as this great defensive weapon. And there was a lot of Bucks fans that really bemoaned the fact that Giannis wasn't a switcher. Like, why is he just in drop coverage all the time? Like, he's the greatest athlete in the league. He's a freak. Why is he not doing this thing switching that is supposed to show all those things? And the big reason is because if he's doing that, if he's at the 3-point line, and you guys are both familiar with this, watching Steven Adams over the years, if you have an elite box out defensive center, like you do in Brook Lopez, someone needs to grab the rebound. And the genius behind the Budenholzer system was Giannis was always there. Because he wasn't switching, he could just stay on the backside. He could help with the rim protection, but also when Brook blocked out 3 dudes, which he does every possession, he's so massive that he's the one that's like in the way of these people. Someone has to swoop in. And right now, because Giannis is switching, Giannis is on the backside, Giannis is covering a shooter, he's out by the 3-point line. And that means it's 6'2" Damian Lillard trying to grab rebounds. It's 6'2" Malik Beasley trying to grab rebounds. It's 6'7" Chris Middleton trying to grab rebounds. They just don't have size around the rim, and their defensive rebound rate has plummeted. And you get to these spots where, it feels like, oh, wow, they switched all these things. They put together a great defensive possession. Well, they didn't finish the defensive possession because they were out of position for all the rebounds that they needed to grab, and you're in this spot. So I think the concerns defensively are real. That is something that they need to figure out. They're both personnel problems and there are tactical problems, and they're going to have to work through that, because I think in the playoffs you have to be a lot more solid than you are right now. I think you guys, I think it's 21 at cleaning the glass right now. Maybe it's 22 in defensive rating. They just aren't good enough defensively. You need to see that number. If you're going to be elite offensively, that number's got to be 15. And then in the playoffs, you got to be able to flirt with top 10 type defense. And I don't know if they can do that right now. So I think the angst around the Bucks is, one, they're using a different formula this year. They used to be a team that was great defensively and scored enough points. Now they are a team that is built to be a great offensive team that gets enough stops. And obviously with a 28-13 record, they've done that on many nights, but also there has been nights where there aren't enough stops. They just aren't getting enough defensive stops. And that's, to me, where this is going to get interesting. Their first half schedule was a lot easier than their second half schedule. I think they had the third easiest schedule to start the season in the first 41. And depending on what you look at, you're looking at a top 5 toughest schedule in the final 41. And when you look at some of those things and you look at like the underlying numbers, as we have just done, you look at the second half of the season, you wonder, okay, like what's going to happen, and kind of how is this going to play itself out over a tougher schedule, tougher opponents, more games on the road. Like, how is that going to play out kind of as the season unfolds?
You mentioned that the piece you did with Seth Partnow, breaking down some of the issues with the Bucks defense. There was a really interesting section in that about opponents recovering the ball after being blocked by Brook Lopez, which is a stat that you asked Seth to track for you this season. What made you initially reach out to Seth about that specific scenario, and what did you learn from his analysis?
I mean, thank you for asking me about it, because I'm really proud of that nerd shit. Like, I do a lot of nerdy stuff. Like, I'm not that's kind of my thing, but that one I'm proud of. So I mean, initially, kind of what I thought was, Brook Lopez, rather than being stationed right at the rim, they're asking him to do more. It feels like the blocks that Brook is getting, and the blocks have stayed about consistent, they've stayed steady, is he's flying from out of position. And maybe not out of position, but the position that he's in is not just at the rim waiting, like, really, come on, try me here at the rim because you're going to get blocked. Instead, it's like, oh my gosh, I got to get to the rim. And to me, my initial hypothesis was that rather than being able to just tip it and block it to himself, since he's flying, more balls will be flying out of bounds. So that was what I asked Seth to track initially. And Seth told me, no, it's about the same amount going out of bounds. But what is different is how many of these blocks they're actually recovering. And I think, to me, the fun part of that number is it's really hard to break down NBA defenses in ways that people can understand. It's confusing. You just see numbers, you see plays on the floor. And I think a lot of times Bucks fans see someone shooting over the top of Brook Lopez. People see Brook Lopez boxing someone out and the rebound going somewhere else. And the thought is, Brook is washed. Brook is too old. Brook has lost a step. Like, whatever it is, because they're used to seeing Brook block those shots or tip those rebounds to someone, or whatever it may be. And I think that number helps illustrate that it isn't that Brook has necessarily lost a step. It's that structurally around Brook, things don't make as much sense. That you haven't put the support behind him in the way that you need for the great stuff that he does, these blocks, this rim protection, to sustain the defense, because his blocks are going to the other team, or someone else isn't helping him after he makes the initial play. So honestly, thank you for asking about that number, because I'm really proud of that number, because again, I think it's really hard to find statistics that can like explain to people this really complex thing you're watching, which is NBA defense, because it can be incredibly confusing to figure out what I'm looking at out on the floor.